In this video, I'm going to cover how we helped a creator with a 90% third world country audience who was stuck around 5K per month, generate 50K per month by launching his trading offer without running any ads and just using that unqualified audience. And the reason I want to do this video is because I want to show you what's possible regardless of the audience qualifications. As I mentioned, with this creator, he had about 30,000 followers. 90% of those people were located in Middle Eastern countries, in India, Pakistan, Asia. By the way, I have no issues with these countries, but specifically like this audience, they didn't really have the financial capabilities to invest into a high ticket program. We'll run through how we maximize this audience and how we manage to squeeze out as much as possible regardless of these setbacks. Because it's very likely if you're watching this and you're a creator, coach, you sell some sort of information online, you have a more qualified audience. And if you implement any of these systems that I'm going to cover from scratch, you'll probably be able to make a multiplier of that $50,000 launch if you do it for yourself. Because if someone with a 30,000 follower audience with a 90% disqualified audience can hit a 50K launch, there's no reason you should be making any less with your brand. You see, my goal when I work with creators, coaches, people selling information online is always to make the most out of what they have. And that's pretty much exactly what I did this launch. Instead of seeing the setbacks with the audience and looking at it from a scarcity perspective, we looked at it from a perspective of what can we do, right? How much can we make out of this, regardless of who we were selling to? So just for some context, before we kind of jump into the details, I partnered up with this creator about 9-10 months ago, right after doing a 300K launch in the trading space. This creator is a trading creator that we're going to cover today. And again, when I partnered with this creator, I understood that there's going to be these massive setbacks, but I did want to see what's possible with the limitations, especially when proper sales systems, proper marketing systems were put in place. I wanted to see what could we convert that audience at, and if we could even convert them at all. Due to these setbacks, the offer at the time when we partnered, it never crossed over 5K per month. And when we partnered up, the guarantee from my side was to hit a minimum of 25K within a month of launch. The goal was to rebrand the offer and launch it to the same audience, not running any ads, not doing anything besides launching to that unqualified audience. And if the guarantee wasn't met, there was a setup fee that I would have to pay back to the creator after doing all the work. And this was actually before the sales call, before the partnership began. The first thing we did was we mapped out the launch itself. So let's actually get into that. So this is what the launch looked like, right? It was a 3-step process. The first step was getting all of the emails on the Instagram. Those were the 2 main audiences, as well as Telegram, and doing a 14-day teaser. I'm going to break down each one of these steps in more detail throughout this video. It was doing a 14-day pre-launch kind of hype up sequence to both the email leads and the Instagram leads. The plan was to use a lead magnet in order to filter out all the brokies who would not be able to afford this. And that's something we actually did more with the marketing language and the marketing content before this launch happened. And we would send all these people to a wait list, right? We would send them all to a wait list until a cart open day, right? So we opened the cart for 5 days. After a 14-day period of hyping up the launch and what was about to come, we did a 5-day launch process, launch sequence you can call it, which included daily Instagram announcements and daily email, right? The cart page had a VSL breaking down the offer. Plan was to have a low ticket product, a mid ticket product, and a high ticket product, which people would have to go through an application form to see which one they qualified for. The plan before the partnership began was to create a VSL, have that lander with the application, and then based on the application, send people to the low ticket and send them into the mid ticket and possibly the high ticket, or just send them directly to the high ticket call if they were qualified. The low ticket itself would come with order bumps. We would try to squeeze as much juice as possible, even though that could sound wrong. These were people, and that's what we treated them as, right? With marketing, the sales process, we were trying to squeeze as much as we could out of the audience, right? Understanding that the audience wasn't the most financially capable, and how we managed to sell $300 packages to people who typically didn't even have twice that amount in their bank account. Of course, we only did this if they were good fits and if we could tell that they would be helped. And we'll also cover how we were able to sell a high ticket program to people who were located in third world countries as well. And by high ticket, I mean 3 to 5K. Now, after mapping out the launch for this creator, there were 2 crucial things that we needed to do to set it up for success. One of those things was obviously partnering up. The partnership went through, but the first thing was for the client to fill out a onboarding form, right? So typically that's how we start the process. And this onboarding form was part of what fueled the market research down the line and helped us with the launch. And here's what it actually looks like, right? So we collect all these answers from the creator, the client, right? So these are just some typical, technical questions. Top competitors, right? This is something you need to look over in market research. We're going to get more into the market research phase as well here shortly. We had to understand, what made these competitors stand out to the client. We wanted to understand the creator's story, right? The background. So we could have a hero's journey mapped out during our launch process, during our marketing. We wanted to understand what the creator wants to talk about, right? For content assets. We wanted to understand more about their business, why they're running it. And essentially these onboarding answers were one of the assets that we would add as fuel to the furnace of, our market research and everything we were doing marketing related. Now, the second thing we had to do as a creator was filling out the actual onboarding was finding a sales rep for the offer. So that's the closer and the setter, right? That's one of the first things we want to start with, because before the launch, if we partner up with someone, we want to launch them within 14 days max, sometimes 10 days, depending on the offer, but no longer than about 21 days, right? Just depending on the offer and where they're at right now. And the number one priority is finding a quality sales rep and a player that's the closer, the setter, or a dialer as well, or a whole team, to make sure when we do launch, we're not scrambling to find someone and we're not placing someone who's, B tier or C tier and isn't really good at their job, because then we're just going to flop the launch and we're going to lose a lot of money in the process. So that's one of the biggest priorities. And just to help you understand the process we typically follow to find sales reps will be, three places, right? Three places we look for people. The first one is sales trainers who charge their students for placement and training. My personal favorite actually, because they're getting trained for what they're paying, right? So the closer or the setter will be paying the sales trainer to get trained, right? And become a better sales rep. And then typically these sales coaches will offer free rep placement because they get reps, right? And if the rep is getting trained, but they don't have an offer to apply that training on, it's somewhat futile. So it's usually an easy way to get quality sales reps, just depending who you go to, right? The second way to hire reps would be to go to Facebook groups. And this one's great. It's just a more of a volume-based approach. So this is just making posts across the different Facebook groups, which are sales related. And a lot of times you're going to get a lot of unqualified people, and about 5-10% of them will be those A players who you can actually interview and see if you can hire them. The next one would be Indeed or Upwork. I actually personally never use this, but Indeed and Upwork, it is good because it could show the sales reps experience just straight up, and it just avoids some of that back and forth. It could save time. My personal favorite would be the sales group or sales trainer. With this offer, with this launch specifically, we went through the first one, right? We went the sales trainer route because it was faster and it was easier to get good quality reps that way at the time. Now, if you're trying to get sales reps for your own offer, typically what you're going to do is you're going to create a job post, right? Whether you send it to a sales trainer, sales coach who's going to source reps for you, or you post it in a group, you're going to create a job post just like this, and you can pause the video here to look over it. And essentially it just describes your offer and attracts the right quality avatar to apply. Now, once the onboarding form was finished, once all of these questions were answered, once there were some applicants in the pipeline for the sales role, the next big step, right? This is huge before any sort of launch, a deep market research phase to really understand the ICP and understand who you're selling to, right? What is that person going through on a day-to-day basis? What cognitive dissonances do they have? What makes those people tick, right? You want to understand all these things. And the truth is, before I partnered up with this offer, as I mentioned, I've already done a multiple six-figure launch in the trading space. So I somewhat understood the ICP. It's very important to understand that creator's specific avatar. What is their cultural background? Who are they? You need to understand the details because those details will help you sell. And I couldn't leave any stones unturned. I had to find those details, right? So we went through this market research phase because that was the only way to maximize the conversions when we would actually launch. The first thing I did was obviously the onboarding form, reviewing every question, and then going into the competitors, right? Looking at what the competitor is doing. And by the competitors, typically what I'll look at is I'll look up the competitor and their name, right? And then Reddit, right? And I want to see what people are saying about them on Reddit, what people are saying about them in their comments, on forums. A great place to go if you're selling trading or something that's ROI related is actually WAP. WAP has a review section, and you can look at the 5-star reviews, you can look at the 4-star reviews, the 3-star reviews, the 2-star reviews. You can see what things people don't like, what people think like. You can see what language they're using, right? What benefits they're describing that they're happy with or they're unhappy with, or the things they're unhappy with when they join your competitor's program. And then what you can do is you can put all of these things into a doc and then use those to your own advantage when you're actually creating your product and you're creating marketing and sales assets for your own product. And the end goal with market research is to create a document like this. It's a 15-page document in this case, and typically you're going to keep adding onto this document as you get more and more information on the offer, right? Because you get deeper pain points, deeper desires that you can speak to in your marketing, in your sales, and increase your conversions that way. So this is typically what it looks like, just a huge doc on the deliverables, problem list, the gap, and how we're going to help them bridge that gap. What is our unique proposition? Why should they believe us? What deliverables do we have? Who are these customers, right? What is the ICP? What questions and objections does this ICP have that we're going to have to sell against? Overall though, to get a document like this, to create a creative brief, what I'll usually follow is a market research process like this. And this is what we actually followed with this offer, and we followed through with this on pretty much every offer, right? So for our market research, we have two sources. We have the primary source and the secondary source. The secondary source includes things like I just mentioned, like the competitors, but we'll also look at general threads on whatever the person is selling. So in this case, it was trading. So we went through Reddit threads on trading to see what people are struggling with, what people are succeeding with. Same thing, as I mentioned, is going through WAP reviews, Quora. You can also go through Amazon reviews, right? And look at what people are saying under books and specific things they can buy to improve their trading, what they like, what they don't like, what they're struggling with, and your competitors, as I already mentioned. And you can typically even fill out a document like this where it's just a little bit more structured and then plug it into the GPT. But before you do, what you want to also do is have primary source, right? And this is actually my favorite way to do market research, right? So you speak to their audience or their clients. Clients is better because they've already bought, right? So you want to understand what made them buy, what fears did they have when they were about to buy that almost made them not buy. And so with this offer, to understand these things, I hopped on, I believe, 7 calls with current customers and clients. And the way we got these calls was by posting a story like this, here's just an example, to a Calendly, right? As well as messaging some current clients and customers to get those calls booked. If someone come on a call, you can also just ask these specific questions. Here's the questions, you can pause the video. These are literally the exact questions I asked during this launch on a type form, right? And get your long form responses and get your market research from there as well. But calls are preferred because you can clarify things and you can dig deeper. It's almost like a discovery call, right? To understand what that person is really going through and what their life looks like. After you do this process, you're gonna put it into GPT. This is exactly what I did with this launch. And you feed it the call scripts, you feed it the form responses. You can also feed it the details you find from Reddit, WAP, Quora, competitors, Amazon, all these primary and secondary sources. And then you're gonna start building out your creative brief, right? You ask it to analyze the transcripts, the threads, everything you submit into it, and then you ask for a list of 50 problems. You ask it to find links between all the prospects, and then you create what I just showed you, the creative brief. And then what this helps you do ultimately, and what it helped me do with this launch, was to find what is the gap they have, and then come up with the deliverables and a sales argument that is gonna get them to buy the product with those deliverables to bridge that gap, right? Because of doing this in-depth market research, I was able to speak to their pains, to their desires, and make that sales argument to get them in, right? And to have the highest conversions possible. And we'll actually run through the conversions as well. Now with this avatar, their biggest desire was typically to quit their 9-to-5 or get out of school, start trading full time, start traveling. That was a big one. And that was actually a difference between the previous trading launch I did and this one, because the previous one, there was an older audience. Traveling wasn't really in the equation for them, right? They had a family. Even if you operate in the same niches, this is why you need to speak to clients specifically from that creator or whoever you're working with. And I mean that for agency owners. Obviously, if you just have your own offer, you just speak to clients in your own audience and understand their own perspective. And just based on this market research, we created two offers, right? We created a low ticket offer and a high ticket offer that we could now sell and start building the marketing assets towards and building the sales scripts, the dialing script, the settings script towards this product. The low ticket was actually a subscription that we priced at $57 per month. We understood that we're selling to an unqualified audience who does not have much money. So we wanted to offer them a way in, and that's what we did with the low ticket, $50 per month. While it's definitely up there, it will still be accessible to a large majority of people. And nailing this low ticket offer was super important. This is why the market research happened, so we could actually nail the low ticket offer. And by the way, during those market research calls and market research responses, a big portion of those people who we spoke to and got data from were people in third world, right? It was people in India, it was people in Asia. That helped us understand their decision-making process, and it helped us understand how we can make that offer for the low ticket more tailored to them. We knew that a lot of those people won't be able to afford the high ticket, so we needed to make a no-brainer low ticket offer. And this is what it looked like. We had a 10K per month prop firm passing system, we had an inner circle, we had weekly accountability, we had a risk management strategy, and I'm just listing these things. They were labeled a little bit differently, and they weren't just labeled where it was like, just the features, and they were more benefit stacked in the actual sales copy. But we had their personal trading strategy that we would give them, and this is all in that $57 per month low ticket. They would get a list of prop firms to use for their trading. They would get a guide to navigate prop firm rules to make sure they don't get screwed over by these prop firms. And there's a few other bonuses that they would get, all for $57 per month, like weekly coaching, Q&A calls, and all these things that would help them make the most out of the program. Now there's also a high ticket offer. This high ticket offer was priced at $4,000, and some of the things that were included was daily one-on-one support, the creator's unique system for passing prop firms and getting funded and getting payouts and making money from trading. They got weekly coaching calls, weekly personalized trading plans and things they should be looking out for, and they got access to a priority support inner circle community, among a few other things. There was also a mid-ticket offer that was in the middle, and this is where a lot of money was made, and I'll show the conversions as I mentioned. The mid-ticket offer offered them more advanced trading education as well as bi-weekly coaching calls, group calls, and it was positioned in a way where if they purchased the low ticket, the mid-ticket, when they got into that, it would help them make more out of their membership and accelerate their results. Now, as you can tell, we really stacked up the low ticket offer and the mid-ticket offer, and this was very intentional because we needed to do everything in our power to make it a no-brainer for people who didn't have much money to still get pulled toward this and buy. Now, there was one scheme we ran with the mid-ticket in order to maximize our AOV and make the most out of this audience. So the mid-ticket itself was priced at $247, and that's typically very low for a mid-ticket, but we had to do it for obvious reasons with this avatar. And then someone would only see the mid-ticket offer once they would purchase the low ticket, right? And then the mid-ticket would be the one-time offer on the next page where there would be a one-click upsell for them to buy it. And just for a little bit more context, this is what it would look like, right? They would go from the application to the low ticket, and then there would be a mid-ticket. And this is obviously not the full page. I don't want to completely dox this offer. Now, the key with the mid-ticket was under the actual one-click upsell button in text that was very visible. We said something along the lines of, if your payment for $247 fails, to help you make the most out of your membership, we're going to automatically put you onto a payment plan of $49 per month. So you can still fast track your success with the mid-ticket offer. And that worked like magic because with a lot of these people, what would happen is they would purchase the low ticket and they didn't have enough funds in their bank account to purchase the mid-ticket. So that automation saved a lot of those conversions and increased our average order value because they would get declined for the $247 purchase, but they would be enrolled into the payment plan. Now, obviously, this probably leads you to a question of, were these people doing this on accident? Was there chargebacks? Is this ethical? Well, the key is they saw exactly what they're buying because under the button, it was very, very clear of what would happen when they would purchase the mid-ticket if their payment failed. And then to answer the question of chargebacks, yes, there were chargebacks, but that was only about 5-10% at its peak, people charging back for the mid-ticket who did it on accident, because we had a customer service team in place where if they were concerned about that $49 per month investment, we would just show them everything they're getting and essentially resell them onto staying in that program where we didn't have have to go through the chargeback, and they didn't cancel their $49 per month mid-ticket offer. And a big part of that was it genuinely a no-brainer offer. They got a lot for staying in. And again, that helped us increase our AOV and it helped us make more money with the offer. Now I need to take a few steps back, right? When we were starting out this launch, before we could start building all of these funnel pages and before we actually started implementing this mid-ticket and built it all out on a sales page, on a landing page, we needed to start a wait list, right? So we have that 14-day sequence where we hype up the launch and what's coming, and we needed to build a wait list page for that to start building up that hype and start building a list of people who were waiting for the launch. Specifically this time it was a 14-day teaser, as I mentioned, and then the launch was 5 days. It was actually a 5-day cart open, 1-day cart close, and then 1-day cart reopen. Now when teasing this launch, the goal was to build hype, establish authority and credibility, and we did a lot of that by spamming proof. And at the same time, we had to handle a lot of the limitation and objections the prospect had in regards to the opportunity to generate money with trading and generate money with prop firms during that waitlist promotion plan. Now back to the launch period itself, just like there is a pre-launch sequence with emails, posts, Telegram posts, Instagram stories, same thing applies to the launch itself, right? So during that launch, as I said, it's a 5-day card open, 1-day fake close where the people think it's gone, like they're not gonna be able to get in, and then 1-day reopen. And every single day there's emails, stories, and posts on Telegram in this case with this offer that we're going out and marketing that launch during the launch sequence as well. We'll break down what that sequence actually looks like and the goal behind every single email, story, and post in terms of maximizing conversions. Now, typically with this model, I'll see 50% of the conversions come through on the first and the last day if it's the 5-day card open, right? The first card open. And about 25% of the conversions with this launch specifically came in those 3 middle days. So if the card open is on Monday, card close is on Friday when you seal off the doors for enrollment, 25% came in between Tuesday and Thursday. And the crucial 25 last percent of the people and sales, they actually came in on that 1-day relaunch where they understood that we're not doing fake scarcity, we're not messing around, and they actually need to join if they're trying to take advantage of this opportunity. Now, back to the promotion plan, as I mentioned, this creator had 3 main channels: Telegram, email, Instagram. His Telegram had about 7,000 people in it, mostly inactive, as the email list had about 9,000 people in it who were never emailed, so also inactive. And his Instagram was actually fairly active. With the stories, he had 30,000 followers and about 3,000 would check his stories, so about 10% engagement on that. One big thing that I avoided during this launch, and I avoid during all launches, is following an 80-20 type rule where you focus on just marketing on your main channels. A lot of the time, the channel that gets thrown out before a launch and doesn't get any attention is emails, because people think emails don't convert as high or they don't get as many sales from emails. And while I understand the logic behind it, I also believe that, again, you need to maximize what you have, make the most out of it. And if you do have attention or the ability to generate attention across all these channels, then you should do it. And that's exactly what I did with this creator. However, I wasn't about to spend days writing out every single sequence. It would take too much time, too much effort. So instead, I grabbed the actual creative brief, right? And I plugged it into Claude AI and got everything built out and written out for me by giving it a proper framework and prompt. And this just makes it a lot more efficient, and it saves you from about 80% of the legwork. The rest of the time comes down to revising everything that it outputs, because it never outputs the perfect result, but it saves a lot of that legwork and it saves a lot of time. And this way we were able to launch faster instead of wasting a week on writing out every single campaign. And by the way, based on the actual emails, what you're able to do is then you can transform the emails into story sequences, which is exactly what we did, and Telegram posts, right? Because you have this long form content in an email, and the AI, once you give it a proper framework and proper structure, it can compress that into something that's going to work in story sequences as well as shorter form posts on Discord, or in this case Telegram. And one thing that played in our favor, even with the unqualified avatar, was back then Instagram let close friends slide by, right? So you could essentially have 1 million followers and plug them into close friends, all of them. And with this creator, he had 30,000 on Instagram back then, so we plugged every single follower into the close friends list. And we did that for the pre-launch stories as well as launch stories, and it literally 4 or 5x the views that he was currently getting at the time before he put all his followers into that close friends list. And what that meant is more attention, right? The more attention we got, the more money we were able to generate, because we were able to put more people through the funnel. Now, the way this actually looked on paper, right, is we sent daily emails, 1 email per day, with stories, and the posts, we would do those every 2 to 3 days, because that was a tighter knit audience and we didn't want to spam them, especially the close friends one, right? Back then, when close friends was available, if you overuse it, people would check it less and less, and sometimes the close friends views would actually go under your normal story views, right? Because people understood that the green circle, the green close friends circle, that they're not really close friends. So the pre-launch emails, the whole idea here was to handle limitations and speak to these primary goals. These were based on the creative brief, right? We exposed the enemy, right? The enemy that was keeping them from succeeding with trading, reveal the mechanism, talk to their pains, talk to their future desires and future pace those. And then same thing with the launch, or at least very, very similar. We used a lot of proof in both the pre-launch and the launch emails. And then there was a little bit more urgency in the actual launch process. The emails did pretty well. We would get around a 30 to 37, up to 40% open rate. The big problem here was most of the people on the email list, they opted in for a free Telegram group, and literally 90 to 95% of the email list was completely unqualified. these were people who just genuinely were living on their last dollar. But that's why we have stories, right? So on Instagram, we had a 10% qualified avatar, 90% disqualified. Again, this whole launch was tailored to both of them, but we would post story sequences like this pre-launch. And then when we launched, we had more direct story sequences with CPAs. Pre-launch, we posted poll story sequences like this, where we would get them through the sequence, speak to a pain point or a desire, and then reveal how the mechanism that we're about to launch on X date is going to help them overcome that. And then we would get them into a waitlist form. And by the way, the waitlist page, this is what it looked like, right? The waitlist page is super simple, right? Reserve your spot and learn how to generate consistent payouts in just 60 minutes per day with prop firm arbitrage, right? That was the name of the mechanism. So they would enter their information here. And there was also a copy hinge on this page that would essentially lead them to the benefits of what they're going to get when they join the waitlist, what they're going to get when this finally launches. So these were our opt-in rates on that waitlist page. We had about a 30% opt-in rate. Unfortunately, most leads were unqualified, and it kind of showed up in the application form that they would fill out on the next step. Yeah, essentially everyone just did not have any money. And then a lot of these responses were actually like test responses that we were doing when we were trying to see if the type form is routing people to the correct place. The primary location for the unqualified avatar in this case was India, as well as Pakistan. And a decent amount of people were from Bangladesh. You could tell from the name, but also you could tell from their phone numbers, right? As well as GHL. GHL actually gives you the location of the person if you look into it. And that was essentially where people were from. Like, as you can see here, just based on the names, you can kind of tell that a lot of these people, obviously if you saw the country codes, but you could see that most of these people were from non-first world countries, which in a lot of cases meant they were not financially qualified. Anyways, regardless of the audience quality, I was now committed to this offer. So as we were getting waitlist opt-ins, I was writing out the video sales letter. In the video sales letter, the big enemy was the prop firm industry that's capitalizing on traders losing, which is actually true. And then the creator and his method were positioned as that solution to beat that enemy, right? And to help this person who was watching achieve all the desires they want while avoiding all the limitations and objections that they would have to achieving those desires. After my version of the VSL was scripted and revised, I uploaded transcripts of the creators speaking into Claude. And then I asked Claude, and this is what I typically always do, to rewrite that VSL in the creator's voice, right? So it sounds just like him. And it actually makes it easier for the person to read the VSL, and it just sounds more authentic when they do. Now, while the emails, the Telegram posts, the story sequences were already in the process of hyping up the launch, right? The pre-launch sequence, the creator at this time was collecting more video testimonials with students, and those would later help us because we would be able to plug them into the marketing, into the sales process, and establish that credibility through proof, and also talk about these trader stories, and the audience would be able to relate to their stories, and that would increase our conversions as well. And that would ultimately help our ICP make those buying decisions and go through with what we were selling. But while this was being done, there was two more things that I was working on in the back end. The first thing was the actual funnel, which I'll go through in detail here in a second, and I'll go over all the conversion metrics we got with the funnel. And the second thing, and this is super important, it can't be missed, it can't be put off until we launch. We need to get this done pre-launch, and that's what I was working on. And that was all of the flows and sequences, right? These were email, SMS, and WhatsApp flows. We had to use WhatsApp in this case because in Europe and Asia, WhatsApp is used a lot more than it is in America or even Canada. So these flows would be plugged into all of those three channels. And that flow would be the waitlist announcement flow, a simple follow-up flow for people who would ghost our messages. Then we would have a flow to win back or recuperate people who would opt into the low ticket, right? With a low ticket, just so you understand what it looks like, is it's a two-step order form, right? They put their details in and this collects their information, and some people just don't know how to check it out. And I'll go over into the stats, but we had a flow that would recuperate these people and get them back into becoming buyers if they just put their information in and left here. We had a flow for people who would ghost the launch messages. We would also have a flow for people who would purchase the low ticket or the mid ticket product but wouldn't book their call, right? So we would have to maximize our ascension there. We had a flow for booked calls to increase their show up rate, reduce cancellations. There would be a flow for people who ended up not showing up or canceling to get them rescheduled. And finally, there would be a flow that would win back people who showed up, had a live call but didn't close. And for the flows and the funnels, we used Go High Level as a CRM, and that was pretty much the mission control for the entire launch, the entire funnel, which we used an A2P number and, as I said, the WhatsApp to actually send out these flows and the email. So to actually break down the flow a little bit more for the funnel, this is what it looked like, right? We had a VSL page, headline, application, 84% completion rate on this application. This was during the launch. This was the launch funnel, right? Something crucial that we had to do, and we did this late, and I'll explain why, but we used geo-targetly. Geo-targetly essentially redirects people based on their IP to a desired place. As you know, I've explained, a lot of the people were from third world countries. So we had a list of countries where automatically, if they lied on the application, which happened a lot actually, if a person lied on an application, but if they were in a country where we would understand they would probably not be able to afford the high ticket, they would still be redirected to the low ticket, even if they said they're making 20K per month, right? And the logic there was if they were making 20K per month, you know, they would buy the low ticket because it was positioned as that unique mechanism that would solve their problems. And then they would be able to, from there, buy the mid ticket and then book their high ticket call either way. So with the actual funnel, we then, after someone would buy the low ticket, we would have the mid ticket. Obviously, if they put their information in, as I explained, didn't buy, they would have a sequence that would chase after them. After they landed on this mid ticket page, they had the option to one-click upsell. If they tried to go off the page page, they would get a offer, a pop-up for a 7-day free trial for the mid-ticket. We were doing everything we could possibly do in order to get as many upsells into the mid-ticket as possible, understanding that we're working with an avatar who we can't typically sell onto a high ticket because they just generally could not afford it. And this is also the same mid-ticket page where they would watch a VSL. It was a forced VSL, right? Just like this one. This was also a forced VSL, right? Next step unlocks when the timer hits 0. The point of this was so we were now getting applications and people trying to get into the funnel who weren't educated on what we do, because there was a huge problem as well at the start. Actually, a mistake I made, right? But after we noticed that there's just a bunch of people who are either coming in unqualified or who are coming in without even understanding what they're coming in for, we had to add this, and this led to a drop off. But this way we got more qualified people to come through the funnel who were actually educated and hyped up about the opportunity that was here in front of them. Now, as I said, this mid-ticket page, this is the same page where there would be that button for the one-click upsell that would put them onto a $49 per month payment plan for 6 months if their payment for $247 failed. And then after someone would land on this page, they would also have an option to click no thanks, right? So whether they bought or click no thanks from the mid-ticket page, the next step would be for them to land on the book a call page. This is where they would book a call for a strategy session with a coach, right? Which was a sales rep. And then from there, they would go to a confirmation page. On the confirmation page, the primary things we did that aided in our show up rate and the entire sales process was an inner circle podcast. So on the confirmation page, we had a podcast between the closer as well as the offer owner to create that transfer of trust. And also in that podcast, we would pre-handle a lot of the common objections that would pop up with this ICP. You know, one common one was time. Do I have enough time to make this work right now? We would also use language in this private podcast that would get people who were unqualified to cancel the call and just not show up, right? So for example, closer would ask, you know, what does it take to actually get started with this model here in 2025? Or in that case, it was in 2024, right? And the creator would reply, well, it only takes about 90 minutes per day, 60 to 90 minutes per day, and $2,000 to $3,000 in capital. And with that, anyone can get into this and, you know, get XYZ result and achieve XYZ desire with this model. Now, I do actually want to cover the stats for the funnel, right? That's super important. So when the launch happened, people opting in through this VSL page, we would have a 29% opt-in rate, and that was based on how many applications were submitted versus the page views. In terms of the low ticket, right, we had a 25% opt-in rate on this low ticket. A lot of them would opt in, they would see the price tag and move away, but we managed to hit 5.63% conversions on the low ticket. And then we also had these order bumps that increased our AOV, right? We had a community upsell on the low ticket where they would get access to this like private section of the community. This was an order bump, which gave us a 59% conversion rate. And then this was another, you can call it a scheme that we ran with this offer. The community upsell was a 7-day free trial, right? So they would be able to 7-day free trial this low ticket community and only stay if they absolutely loved it. And we had about 70 to 80% of people stay, right? So we gave them access, that 7-day free trial. We would create a lot of FOMO in that community with the wins, with the results people were getting, with the support they would lose if they didn't continue from their trial. So a lot of people just got rebuilt and they stayed. Now, the other thing we had was a copy and paste trading setup, right? And these were, by the way, these were actually outlined on the page, right? There was order bump copy outlining exactly what they would get. But the copy and paste trading setup was just copy and paste risk management tools as well as charts the person could just copy and paste into their account. It seemed very effortless and easy to implement to help them on their journey. With order bumps, the goal is always to look at what is your low ticket product offering and what would be the next logical thing that could help that person either accelerate the results or improve their results if they already have the low ticket membership, right? And that's exactly what these things were. Now, with the low ticket book a call. Now, before we go over the book a call stats, there's the mid ticket offer as well. So again, the mid ticket would only be exposed to people who would purchase the low ticket. On the mid ticket page, we had a 4% conversion rate. And by the way, this 4.6% conversion rate does not include people who were put on to that payment plan, right? Because on Go High Level's end, their payment failed, right? But on our back end, we were able to automatically enroll them into that 6-month payment plan for the mid ticket, right? So the conversion rate here was actually around 7 to 8%. Now with this book a call page, we had about a 57% booking rate, which isn't optimal. I'd want to aim for 65 to 70% with like a warm audience like this. But also a lot of the people who were seeing the book a call page were mostly very qualified leads, right? It was people who either purchased something, right, and would go here, or it was people who were based in first world countries who geo-targetedly would redirect, if their application form said they're qualified, would redirect them to the call page, right? So only qualified people were booking the calls. Unfortunately, again, this geo-targetedly change was done too late, which I'll get into here in a second. And we actually started by booking a lot of bad fits. And just so you understand, like by a lot of bad fits, this is what it was, right? We had 200 calls, primarily just bad fit calls. And we actually had to cancel all of these. And while this launch was going with the funnel, while we were, trying to figure out how we make the most out of it with the quality, the setter was responsible for the Telegram, the setter was responsible for the Instagram, and then the setter was also setting through Go High Level itself, right? Through the phone numbers, because we were getting in contact with people through WhatsApp as well as SMS via the GHL CRM. To help the setter better convert the leads he was dealing with, he had an entire setting script that we mapped out that he was following. very logical process, right? Any setter could pretty much come in and take over this, right? The follow-ups, the actual SMS, the actual conversation script that would be very conversational, the booking process, and everything the setter needed to make the most out of it. Something I would also do during the first days of the setter setting would be reviewing his conversations and getting on calls with him to do those reviews and explain how I would change those things in order to improve his conversations in the future. One thing I would also do would be getting the setter to send me things he didn't know how to reply to. Now, the problem here is like, if you get reps to do this, specifically DM setters, you create a bad habit where there's just directly going to you to get support for like the smallest things. So a rule that I like to set in place with setters is, if you're going to send me a question, right, where you're not sure how to respond to a specific conversation or message, tell me what you would have said, right? Like what you were thinking of saying. So that way I'm not just reviewing and giving you the answer straight up, but you're coming to me with a solution, with a possible answer of what you would say, and then I'm just telling you how you can improve what you would have answered in that conversation. Hopefully that makes sense. The setter was getting comped 5% of all the sales he generated. There was also a closer who was generating 10% of all sales that he made. And this was the closer's script, right? The closer also got a complete script to make the most out of what he was doing. When a lead purchased a low ticket product, they would get an automated invite process that would lead them to an onboarding. When a closer closed someone, they would create a group chat between that person and the creator, and the onboarding process would happen that way. Typically, the creator would have an onboarding call with the lead to give them their personalized trading roadmap and get them on board with the program. And one thing, as I mentioned, is this geo-target lead scheme was put in place a little bit too late. So we booked all these calls that were unqualified. A lot of them had to get canceled. A lot of them the closer actually went to. And this happened before geo-target lead because so many people would lie on their application. So many people would tell us that they have money, they're financially qualified. And a lot of people wouldn't even lie. They would just misunderstand, right? And this is where it comes down to understanding your ICP. A lot of people would take the question of their financial state, their financial capability, what they're funded for in their account, right? So there's these prop firm accounts that we're trading, and these prop firm accounts are like simulated money accounts, right? And some people would have a 20K simulated account. It's not actual real money, or 50K simulated account, or 100K simulated account. But they would take that as the real money, right? How much money they actually have. And then they would answer that on the type form, and then we would have all these unqualified leads going to the call page and booking calls when they shouldn't have been doing that. And unfortunately, due to the poor lead quality, after a short week or two, the closer actually hopped off the offer because he was tired of it. And I completely understand him. And that's where the creator actually came in and took over the sales. The creator didn't want to pay closer commissions. The creator had some sales experience previously. He took over the sales process, and from there we averaged about a 20 to 25% close rate at the most. And that's pretty low for organic. The creator started taking calls after geo-target lead was put in place, but there were still some unqualified leads coming through. So after that initial 5-day card open, 1-day close, 1-day reopen, that 7-day sequence was over, we still had a lot of people DMing us. There was many chat automations going off, so we had the setter working in the DMs to make the most out of what we had remaining. The setter was getting frustrated because of so many leads that he was talking to just were completely broke. But regardless of that, he kept booking onto the calendar with the creator, and we were able to squeeze out as much as possible out of what we had with those 30,000 followers, the 10% qualification, 90% unqualification rate, and in total, we managed to collect roughly around $50,000 across Stripe and WAP from the low ticket, the mid ticket, and the high ticket offer. And I think there was a few things we could have done better to actually make even more out of this launch. Specifically, the first thing was to get a dialer on board, going through the lead list of qualified leads. We had some qualified leads. We could have made more of them by not just having a DM setter, but having someone actually calling them. The only problem here would be that the dialer would only have so many people to dial until he completely ran out of them, right? Because it was primarily unqualified people opting in. The second thing is we should have had a downsell via sell, right? The downsell via sell would have increased our conversions even further, because what we had was a product mock-up image like this, but no VSL on the low ticket page. And the thought process behind that, so if they watch the VSL on the landing page and right away they fill out the form and they're qualified for the low ticket page, we don't need another VSL, right? But I actually disagree with that set of beliefs, because having a low ticket VSL and saying, look, you qualify for this product that's going to help you do XYZ, and essentially selling them onto this low ticket product would have increased our conversion rates. Now, the next thing is we could have definitely done a better job downselling the mid ticket on the setting, through the setting side of things, as well as the actual sales calls, which we didn't do enough of, right? If someone was disqualified, there's more money that could have been made with downsells from the mid ticket. We didn't have an actual downsell script, right? So it was very rare for the mid ticket to be downsold. And I think that's been a massive gap when we did this launch, and we could have generated a few more thousand by having that dialed in. The last thing was our post-launch webinar, right? So every launch I do, pretty much every niche, I like to do a post-launch webinar. Essentially, if there's a launch 2 weeks after the final close, right? The last relaunch day part closes, the post-launch webinar works really well, because 2 weeks after that, you can essentially be like, for everyone who didn't make it in for whatever reason, if you were on the fence, if you didn't trust us enough, we're actually doing something to make it up to you. We're doing this free live training on achieving XYZ benefits, just depending on your niche. And it works great. Typically, I've noticed about a 20% increase in total conversions over like a monthly period. If you take it from the day you do the launch and go over the next 30 days, because you do that webinar 2 weeks after the launch. And that's because it gets a lot of people who are on the fence over the line, right? And it gets them to buy. And the reason for that is because webinars are a lot more demonstrative. So the people who don't sell through the short VSL, they don't sell through the emails, there's a lot more one way that you have to sell them on the webinar. And you have a lot more time to build that trust and get those people over the fence to becoming your customers, whether in the low ticket or the high ticket. Typically with a webinar, we would just run it to a book a call funnel, or we would run it to mid-ticket offer. I think if we ran a webinar here, right, which was built, it never ran, the creator didn't want to run it, unfortunately, but we would have actually ran it to the mid-ticket offer, because 90% of the people who would join the webinar would never be able to afford the high ticket. So we would just sell the mid-ticket for $247 and then offer them payment plans as well in the webinar to just make the most out of it. Now, for my final thoughts, the biggest suggestion to the creator here was to make more personalized content, because the content this creator was putting out, and this was an oversight when I partnered with him, right? So this is not blaming, but it's just essentially looking at what would have worked better. The content that was being put out was just these hyper dopamine edits of success trading. You've probably seen those like Andrew Tate affiliate edits, and they work, but it just attracts the wrong ICP. And it doesn't build a lot of credibility. It doesn't build a lot of trust, because it's almost like you're running a theme page, trying to turn a theme page, like theme page with edits, into a personal brand. And it doesn't work really well, because it attracts a brain rot audience, and not a lot of them have money, right? And also it attracted, in this case, a lot of people from third world countries, where again, 90% of the audience was third world. The next suggestion I made to the creator here after this partnership, after the launch, was to use YouTube more. Even if the Instagram was done for and it was attracting more and more of these unqualified leads, with the YouTube, it was almost like a fresh start where he could make longer form personalized content that would attract that correct audience and would help him scale his info product in the long run. With this launch, I was pretty content with the numbers we hit, considering the severity of the audience and just how difficult it was. But I did come to the conclusion of not partnering up with clients, creators who had disqualified audiences like this after this happened. And the reason for that is because it's just a constant uphill battle. And I think initially when I signed this creator, it was already after that big launch, I just fell into two different traps. The first trap was that trap of collecting cash without necessarily vetting the creator and seeing if this creator, if this offer was aligned with my long-term goals. And the second trap was, once I signed the client, I had a chance to refund the client, right, and stop the partnership before putting all my time and energy and focus into this. And that second trap was trying to prove myself right? Instead of doing something that could actually make me more money, finding a better partnership at the time that I could generate more with, that I could get better results in, I was almost trying to prove a point. And I did prove a point, but I'm not sure if that was the best thing I could have done with my time at that point in time. Problem was, when I decided to go through with the partnership, it was a little bit demotivating, right? Knowing the audience that, I'm fighting this uphill battle, I found it to demotivate me. And I was less invested into the launch and the long-term growth of the offer, because there was not much of that personal brand, right? The audience was getting attracted through these hyper edits, and the audience quality wasn't great. So I knew that long-term, after we do this launch, after we, squeeze as much as possible out of what we had, there wasn't much potential growth unless the creators started doing that better, more personalized content, unless the creators started going on YouTube, which unfortunately didn't happen. I do think this was a worthy challenge. I learned a lot about properly qualifying people in the funnel. I learned how to convert lower financial status people as well. And hopefully, if you're trying to launch a program, or maybe unfortunately you have a unqualified audience, this video will help you. And if you're looking to increase how much you generate with your brand and squeeze more out of what you have with proper systems in place, proper marketing systems, proper sales systems, tracking, the back end, the operations, but you simply don't have the time or knowledge to do it yourself. You want to focus on the content, you want to focus more on the fulfillment, and hopefully you have a qualified audience. Book a discovery call down below, and I'll see if there's any way we could help you scale your brand and obviously make more money with it in the long run. You could also shoot me a DM on IG, which is also linked down below. If you have any questions about this video, about this launch, about how we made, what we made with this audience type, how to sell to a disqualified audience, you can message me on Instagram and I'll probably be able to help you there. So that's pretty much it. Hopefully you learned something, and thank you for watching.